I need to tell you this story before the memories drive me mad. I'm not sure who I'm trying to convince with this post, whether it's you or myself, but I can't keep living in silence. The horror of what happened is still fresh in my mind, clawing at me every day. If you ever meet someone like my wife, Grace, run. Please, just run. I remember the day everything changed. It was an ordinary Tuesday, no different from any other. Grace came home from her shift at the hospital, smiling as she always did, her face radiant and kind. We kissed, made dinner, and sat down to watch a movie. But something about her felt off. I can't pinpoint it exactly. It wasn't anything overt, just a subtle shift in the air. I pushed it out of my mind. After all, we had been through so much together. I trusted her completely. But then, I found the box. It was in the garage, tucked away behind a pile of old holiday decorations. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was just looking for a wrench to fix a leaky pipe. And there it was, an old wooden crate, almost hidden as if it didn't want to be found. I opened it. Inside, there were photos. A lot of photos. People I didn't recognize. Some of them were faded, others were clear as day, and all of them were of people I'd never seen before. I flipped through them, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. And then I saw it, beneath the photos. Clippings from local newspapers, all about disappearances, murders. And one other thing, a knife. A dark red stain on its blade. I didn't need to ask what it was. I heard her before I saw her. Did you find it? Her voice, soft and calm, echoed through the garage. I turned around slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Grace stood in the doorway watching me. There was no trace of the warmth she usually carried in her eyes. No kindness, just cold, calculating, something else. I froze, my mouth dry. Grace, what is all this? She didn't answer at first. Instead, she stepped forward, her hand reaching for the knife. My breath hitched. I didn't want you to know, Nathan, she said, her voice strangely calm, even soothing. But now you have to. The shock of what I was seeing hit me hard, and for a moment, I couldn't process it. This woman, the one I loved, the one I had built my life with, was hiding a monster inside her. And I hadn't known. Grace, what are you talking about? I tried to take a step back, but my legs felt like lead. What is all this? Why do you have these things? She looked at me with pity, as if I were the one who had been blind all these years. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered, but I had to. They all deserved it, Nathan. Every one of them. Her words felt like a slap. She wasn't even looking at me now. Her gaze was distant, like she was recalling something from another life. I've been doing this for years. There are so many people I've taken from this world. I didn't want to. But sometimes, people just need to be removed. My stomach twisted. You killed people? Yes, she said, with a soft, almost loving smile. But only the ones who were hurting others. The ones who needed to disappear. Her explanation didn't make sense. How could she be so calm, so nonchalant? I was shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. But it was when she pulled out a fresh set of photographs that the full scope of her depravity sank in. One of the photos was of my sister, Ellie, the same sister who had come over to babysit our dog just 2 days ago. Grace, I whispered, my throat tight. Where is Ellie? She just smiled. She was getting too close, Nathan. Too close to the truth. I couldn't breathe. My world began to shatter. My sister was gone, and my wife had killed her. She had killed her. The woman I had trusted more than anyone else in my life had taken my sister's life without a second thought. I don't remember how long I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the photograph. But the next thing I knew, I was yelling at her, demanding to know why. And that's when she attacked me. In an instant, her calm, collected demeanor disappeared. She was on me, knife raised, slashing at my chest. I barely had time to react. The pain was sharp, searing, as the cold steel cut into me. I tried to push her away, but she was stronger than I ever expected. The woman I married, this loving, gentle soul, was a predator. I don't know how long the struggle lasted. I don't know how I managed to escape, but somehow I did. I stumbled out of the garage, bleeding, terrified, my body shaking from the shock. I ran to the neighbor's house, begging for help. I barely remember it. All I remember is her smile before I fled, that cold, empty smile. Grace never got caught. She framed me for Ellie's murder, and the police believed her. I was labeled as the violent husband who snapped. I spent days on the run, hiding, trying to prove my innocence. But nothing worked. The evidence she planted was overwhelming. No one believed me. And then I came back. I had to. I needed to find proof. I needed to expose her for who she really was. But when I stepped inside our home, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick with a sense of unease, like the walls were closing in on me. I found her in the living room, sitting in the dark, a knife in her hand. "You came back," she whispered, her voice soft, but with an edge of something dangerous. "I knew you would. I knew you couldn't stay away." My heart dropped as I realized the truth. She had always known. She had always known I would return, and she had been waiting for me, waiting to finish what she had started. I managed to escape again. Barely. But the thing is, she never left me. I hear her sometimes, whispering in the walls, calling my name. It's like she's still here, just out of reach. The memories of her, the things she did, are clawing at my mind, trying to drag me back into that hell. I don't know if she's alive or if I'm just losing my mind. But either way, I can't escape her. And now I'm posting this to you, to the void, hoping someone out there will believe me. But part of me wonders, did I make this all up? Was she ever really real? Or was it always just me? All I know is I'm trapped, and she's still out there, watching, waiting. It was October 18th, 2018. I remember the date so clearly because it was supposed to be an ordinary night. Just another night out with friends, a few drinks, and then a ride home. Nothing special, nothing to make it stand out. But looking back, I wish I had never taken that cab. I'd been at the bar, having a few drinks with friends, celebrating nothing in particular. By the time we left, it was late, close to 2 a.m. I'd had a few too many and decided it was best to call a cab instead of trying to drive home. My place wasn't far, just a few miles down the road. The streets were quiet, almost empty, except for a few cars cruising by. When I opened my phone to hail a cab, I didn't expect anything unusual, but that's exactly what I got. The yellow cab pulled up, and the driver looked like your average guy, middle-aged, unremarkable. He had a scruffy beard, messy hair, and a tired look about him. He didn't say much when I climbed in, just nodded and muttered, "Where to?" I told him my address, and he didn't seem too interested. The ride started out just like any other. The radio was on low, and he kept glancing at the road, his hands gripping the wheel too tightly. I shrugged it off, not thinking much of it at the time. But as we drove, something felt off. It wasn't anything I could place right away, just a feeling of unease. The way he kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, the way his eyes would flicker between me and the street. I tried to brush it off, probably just a tired cabbie, right? Then he did something that made my stomach twist. He made an unexpected turn, veering off the main road and onto a quiet, dimly lit side street. I thought maybe he was just trying to take a shortcut, but there was something in the way he glanced at me in the mirror that made my gut tighten. "This isn't the way to my place," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are we going?" He didn't respond, just kept driving, eyes glued to the road. I told myself not to panic. Maybe he was just taking a different route, but why did it feel like we were getting farther away from everything? As we continued down that dark street, I heard a faint sound, a scream. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, straining to hear. The cabbie didn't seem fazed at all. He didn't even acknowledge it. But then, another scream, louder this time, followed by a crash of glass. I snapped my head toward the source of the sound, and that's when I saw them. A man and a woman, struggling in an alley. I couldn't make out the details at first, but it was clear that something was wrong. The woman was screaming for help, and the man was throwing punches, trying to defend himself. The cabbie didn't slow down. He didn't even flinch. I thought he'd keep driving, but instead, he stopped the car completely. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. What was he doing? Without a word, the cabbie reached under his seat, pulled out a gun, and shot the man. Once, twice. The woman shrieked, backing away, her eyes wide with terror. Then, without hesitation, he turned the gun on her, firing without a second thought. Blood splattered across the pavement as both of them crumpled to the ground. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. I sat there, frozen, watching them die, my entire body shaking. I wanted to get out, to run, but I was paralyzed. The cabbie didn't even acknowledge what he had just done. He simply put the gun back under his seat, started the engine again, and turned the wheel as if this was just another day on the job. I was in shock. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. My voice had completely disappeared, drowned by the terror filling me from head to toe. I just stared at the rearview mirror, at the cabbie's cold, expressionless face, wondering if he was going to kill me next. But he didn't. He just drove on, as if nothing had happened. I still couldn't wrap my head around it. What the hell had just happened? The screams still echoed in my mind, and the image of their bodies lying in the street burned into my brain. I couldn't stop shaking. A few minutes passed in silence, and I thought maybe I was going to make it through this. Maybe he'd just drop me off and go about his business. But that's when he said something that froze me in place. "You saw nothing," he said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "If you tell anyone, you'll be next." I couldn't speak. I didn't even nod. I just sat there, feeling the weight of his words settle over me like a suffocating blanket. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it out alive. I wasn't sure if anyone would believe me if I did. The drive continued, and as we neared my apartment, I thought I saw a chance to escape. The cabbie had slowed down at a red light. This was it. I could jump out, run, scream for help. But as I reached for the door handle, he stopped the car completely and turned to look at me again. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice low. "I know where you live. I know everything about you. Don't think you're safe." My hand froze on the door handle. The fear gripped me even tighter. How could he know that? How could he have been following me? Then, just as suddenly as it started, he sped off again, turning down another street. I had no idea where we were, no idea what was happening, but my body was screaming at me to get out. Get away. Run. But I couldn't. After what felt like an eternity, the cab came to a stop. We were in a completely different part of town, an area I didn't recognize. The cabbie didn't even look at me as he turned the engine off. "Get out," he said. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking like jelly beneath me. As soon as my feet hit the pavement, I turned and ran, not looking back, not caring where I was. I kept running, the sound of my own footsteps pounding in my ears. I made it back to my apartment somehow, but even as I slammed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The cabbie had been too calm, too collected. He had been watching me. He had known exactly where I was going. The next day, I went to the police. I tried to tell them what happened, but they just looked at me like I was crazy. No cab, no bodies, no evidence. The street was empty when they got there. The alley where the murders happened was clean, untouched. They didn't believe me. And that's when I realized the worst thing of all. The cabbie wasn't just some random killer. He was stalking me. He knew everything about me. Where I worked, where I lived. And now, every time I leave my apartment, I feel his eyes on me. Every car that passes, every shadow that moves. I wonder if it's him. I'm still haunted by that night. It was 2 years ago, but I can't escape it. Every time I hear a car drive by, my heart races. I've changed my routine, moved my apartment, but I know he's still out there, watching, waiting. It was the summer of 2016, a time I wish I could forget but can't. It all started like a bad dream, the kind you think will fade, but instead, it grows darker and more vivid. My name is David Simmons, and for the last 4 years, I've been carrying a weight I can't shake. If you're reading this, I'm hoping I can finally get it off my chest before it drives me mad. I had the perfect family. Adam, my older brother, was everything I could ever ask for in a sibling. He was smart, athletic, charming, and incredibly protective. Growing up, I looked up to him. People adored him, our parents, our friends, even the neighbors. He had a way of making you feel special, like you were the only person in the world that mattered. I was no exception. He was my protector, my confidant. When I got into trouble, it was Adam who stepped in. When I needed advice, it was Adam I turned to. I never questioned it. But in hindsight, I should have. Because the truth is, something was off with Adam. It was gradual, like a cold seeped into our lives, and I didn't even notice it until it was too late. I don't know exactly when things started to change, but I remember the first red flag clearly. It was during a family dinner, our usual Sunday night gathering. The conversation shifted to the news. There was a story about a local woman who had gone missing. People were upset, concerned. It was the kind of thing that rattled a small town like ours. But Adam wasn't rattled. He spoke about the disappearance in a detached way, as if he understood it on a level no one else did. People just vanish, he said with a half smile, staring at his plate. Sometimes they deserve it. His words froze me in place. I remember thinking it was a weird thing to say, but then I rationalized it. Adam was analytical, maybe too analytical. He had always been that way. Maybe it was his way of processing tragedy, of distancing himself from the emotions that others felt. I didn't think much more of it at the time, but that was just the beginning. The first victim was someone I knew well, Jessica. She wasn't just a family friend. She was like a sister to me. Jessica had been around our house since we were kids, so when she suddenly disappeared, it hit us hard. The police didn't have much to go on. No evidence, no leads. Her family was frantic. My parents were devastated. But through it all, Adam acted strange. It was subtle at first. He avoided talking about her disappearance, refused to help when the family asked if anyone had seen her recently. There were moments when he would go quiet, his eyes distant. I could tell something was off, but I never confronted him. He was my brother after all. He wouldn't hurt anyone. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Adam knew more than he was letting on. I didn't have the courage to ask. I was too afraid of what I might find. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I realized just how wrong I was. I was working late in my home office one night, the soft hum of the computer screen the only sound in the house. My parents had already gone to bed, and I thought Adam had gone out with friends. But then, through the thin walls of the house, I heard something. Voices. At first I thought it was just the TV, but when I listened closer, I realized it was Adam. He was on the phone, speaking in a low, calm voice. His words were chilling, distant. "I took care of her," Adam said. "She won't be a problem anymore." I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was the way he said it, so casually, like it was no big deal. As if Jessica's life had meant nothing to him. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind raced. Was this a joke? Was he messing with me? I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore what I had heard. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear those words echoing in my head. I took care of her. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't confront Adam. What would I even say? So I did what I thought was best. I kept quiet, but I couldn't shake the growing dread inside me. That night, I made a decision. I had to know the truth. When Adam returned from work, I waited until we were alone. My heart was racing as I asked him outright, "Did you have something to do with Jessica's disappearance?" Adam's face went blank. His eyes turned hard, cold. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in them, something dangerous. And then he smiled. That damn smile. "Why would you think that?" he asked, his voice too calm, too smooth. "You're overreacting, Dave. You always were the paranoid one." But I wasn't paranoid. I was terrified. Something in my gut told me the truth, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. A few nights later, things escalated. Adam confronted me in the dark of the night. His footsteps were silent as he entered my room, his shadow falling across the floor. I was awake, my heart hammering in my chest. Before I could say a word, he sat down at the foot of my bed. "You know what I did," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "And now you're a problem." I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place. "Adam, please," I started, but he cut me off with a low chuckle. "You should have stayed quiet," he said. "But now I can't leave loose ends." And just like that, everything in me snapped. It was clear now. Adam was a monster, a cold-blooded killer, and I was his next target. I fought. God, I fought for my life. But Adam was too strong, too methodical. He had this terrifying calmness, like he was playing a game. He didn't even seem to care that I was his brother. Somehow, I managed to escape, my body covered in cuts and bruises. I ran out of the house, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I barely remember getting to the police station. The rest is a blur of pain and fear. But when the cops arrived at our house, Adam was gone. No sign of him. Just a house full of silence and horror. That was 4 years ago. They never found Adam. No one knows where he went. But just last month, I received something in the mail. A letter postmarked from a town I didn't recognize. I opened it, and there, in his unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "I told you I'd always take care of you. Don't forget to smile." I'm posting this here because I can't shake the feeling that Adam is still out there, watching me, waiting.